So I'm going to talk to you about MARS, which is the Manchester Amputation Reduction Strategy. And in line with the conference, I want to give you sort of some pearls of wisdom, 5 lessons that I've learned from the project that can be incorporated in other parts. So I'll start with just the overall results first. So we know Manchester is in the northwest of England, and there's a difference between Manchester City and Greater Manchester. So Manchester itself got a population probably of around sort of 700,000 with Manchester and Trafford. Greater Manchester is made up of 10 localities, those 10 CCGs in old money, with a population of about 3 million. It's 2.8 million or 3.2 if you include other people, but it's roughly about 3 million people. And there's one vascular service for the entire Greater Manchester, which is, and it's as Johnny Bull will be saying later on, it's one of the busiest units in the country. And the key result for MARS, the amputation reduction strategy, between 2015-16 and 21-22, amputations across Greater Manchester went down by 21%. Where we piloted MARS in detail in a place called Salford, it went down by 42%. So within 6 years, a 42% reduction in amputation number, a 46% reduction in prevalence. And if you compare that with other parts of the country, or other parts of Manchester, in some areas it went up by 10%, in other areas it went down by 5%, and so in the third most deprived region, which is Salford, it went down by 42%. You can see here in Manchester it went up by 10%, but if you look at the population rise was 10% as well. And so I think what this shows here is when there's a population rise of 10% and the amputation rise went up by 10%, what we often feel is you're working harder and harder just to stand still. And that's one of the big problems that we have within the NHS at the moment. And across GM, both amputation in the diabetic and the non-diabetic population went down by 18 and 26%. And in Salford, it went down by double that amount. So we are doing something different in Salford. And I'll explain what that is. Now, by having those results, what you do, you create inequality. What we've actually done is made the problem worse in some ways because we've generated more of an inequality. But that gives us a narrative which we can then now go to the ICB, because inequality is a problem of the ICB. So that's how you get things onto the agenda. So the headline results for MARS is that we reduced amputations by 46% with a 15% population rise, which is double the regional average. We've saved about £200,000 a year in hospital amputation costs alone. The community costs are a lot greater than that. And key thing is that we increased access to the MDT. Now we know from the diabetic foot audit that the key predictor of healing and reduced amputations is MDT care and fast access to the MDT. And time to first expert assessment. Those are the 2 key things. So my question is this: diabetic foot ulcers have MDT care. Why not leg ulcers? Why not lymphedema? Why not non-diabetic foot ulcers? Why is it just one group of people have access to MDT but nobody else does? So how do you level up access to the MDT care within existing resource? And that's what we're trying to do. So the first one is know the bigger picture of your particular clinical problem. And so the question was, how do we reduce amputation? So the first question we asked is, well, what actually causes an amputation? Well, there's trauma and there's chronic disease. The trauma is about 5%, and we were mainly focusing on chronic disease. And if you look at, most people think when it comes to an amputation, it's all diabetes, right? But half of all major amputations are in people who do not have diabetes. So if your whole strategy is just to reduce diabetic amputations, you will only ever have half a strategy. It will never be a full strategy. And this is right at government level as well. And the main cause is peripheral arterial disease. Half of all major amputations are due to non-diabetic peripheral arterial disease. And most diabetic amputations, about 80%, have a vascular component as well. So that's the first thing. So then we went a bit further. I said, okay, if it's all about ulcers, how many ulcers do we have in Greater Manchester? So we said, okay, well, you know, if you had foot ulcers, leg ulcers, lymphedema, how big is the problem? And essentially, it's 4,500 people with 7,000 wounds being dressed on average twice a week. That's 14,000 ulcer dressings every week across Greater Manchester. And the bill for this, just in wound products alone, is about £15 million. Then we went a bit further than that, all right? So we know the cost is, if you put the Julian Guest data to Greater Manchester, the cost is about £200 to £300 million, and that's going up. Then you add in all the social side of it with depression and vascular disease and chronic disease and all of that. And then you've actually got a much bigger problem. It's not just about ulcer. What we often forget is, that ulcer is attached to a leg, which is attached to a heart, which is attached to kidneys, which is attached to lungs, which is attached to a brain. All of that is needed to actually heal the ulcer. So we need to think much more holistically. And then we need to think about prevention as well. And I'm not going to talk too much about the prevention strategy, but something called 3-4-50 and Core 20+5, which is what our prevention strategy is around. So to summarise all that, it's a whole system strategy. If you want to reduce amputations, you've got to reduce the risk factors that lead to chronic disease, that lead to ulcers, that lead to an amputation, which means you've got to work across public health, community and hospital, which means, and then you've got to work across pathways, digital procurement and cultural integration as well. There's a whole lot of work that needs to be done. So that's the clinical problem that you need to fix. It's a much bigger clinical problem. So the next lesson is, what's the bigger system problem that you're trying to fix, and how does your clinical problem fit into it'll make sense in about 5 minutes. I'll bring all the strands together, right? So what's a bigger system-wide problem that you want to fix, and how does a narrative of wound care fit into that bigger problem? Well, the wider system piece, we know Lord Darzi recommendations is about, hospital to community, treatment to prevention, and analog to digital. But there's actually a whole load of other suggestions as well, which people often don't concentrate on, which is from silos to whole systems working, from stress to steadfastness. You cannot improve the system if you cannot improve the way your workers, your colleagues are working. If they're under stress and they're working harder and harder just to stand still, how are you going to improve things? How are you going to make change? How are you going to reduce the stress? And then you've got to save money at the same time. Within Greater Manchester, we've got to save £200 million this financial year alone. And then there's the whole thing around black to red and red to green, which is the green agenda. There's a whole bigger problem as well. So when you bring the two together, the question is slightly different if you want to effect system change. Number one is, how do amputations fit into the wider problem? Which is simple, better prevention plus better ulcer care reduces amputations. And we know that MDT care improves care, right? So then it becomes, how do we increase access for everyone? All right. So let's reframe the question with Darzi recommendations to the wound care problem. And this is the question that you need to answer, right? How do we increase capacity within existing resource, reduce stress, be more fair, green, fiscally responsible, and reduce demand, all right, while taking advantage of technology? So that's the question I had to answer. And the answer is, how do you do this? And I thought, and I spoke to loads of people, and I spoke to, Richard Shawnee, I've spoken to loads of times, and Keith Harding's here, and Johnny Ball, and you've got to speak to people who have a problem, all right? Not people who have a problem, people who can fix your problem. I'm not saying Richard's got a problem, right? Okay. And the ultimate answer is, there's only 4 things you can do. If you want to increase capacity within existing resource, there are only 4 things you can do, right? Co-design good. You've got to get all the people together in a room, get them to know each other, get them to trust each other, and all agree what does good look like. Number 2, you got to, as a service, stop doing some stuff, all right? For podiatry, that is doing routine nail cutting. Well, you're going to have to stop doing stuff. You don't want to, it's not good, but you've got to stop doing some stuff to increase capacity. Number 3, you've got to do more appropriate stuff. And I'll speak that in a moment. And finally, it's about building networks. So you stop duplication within the service. I'm going to give an example of how you can do more appropriate stuff. So in our MDT, often is seen as a dumping ground. We don't know what we're doing. We'll just send it to the MDT and let them sort it out. What we started doing is, with our podiatrists, we trained them and we taught them to do duplex scans. My podiatrists now order duplex scans, they order CT scans, they order MR scans. So instead of coming to clinic to see me and they've got to order a duplex scan, then they come back and with a CT scan. Instead of having 3 or 4 visits, it's just 1 visit. And that clinic becomes a decision-making clinic. So you can reduce capacity that way. Then you got to train up the nurses and the podiatrists. Okay, what question do you want the MDT to answer? What is it do you want me to do? Do you want me to fix a blood supply, which is all I can do? Do you want me to make a diagnosis, which is some of the stuff I can do? Or do you want me just to say, I don't know what I'm doing, just sort something out? So we have to give nurses the confidence to be able to sometimes hold on to wounds. And number two, and sometimes more importantly, get rid of them. Send them to the MDT. Sometimes if you hold on to wounds too long, we were getting them far too late. And what we realized, one of the big problems and one of the big issues with nurses is this. If they get it wrong, they lose their pin. And that fear of losing the pin is so real, it sometimes paralyzes people. So as a vascular surgeon and as doctors, we had to give confidence to the system to be able to do things differently and say, I've got your back. So when it comes to co-design, you've got to listen to people to understand what the barriers are and then actually address those particular barriers. Okay, and then networks is around, people, one of the big problems, right, is putting compression on. It's simply getting an ABPI. How long does it take to get an ABPI? And when you can't do an ABPI because it's too painful, what do you do then? Well, the answer is toe pressures, right? So then you've got to start buying toe pressure machines and train people on toe pressure machines. And so you've got to facilitate all of that as well. And I can talk about that if needed. So what did we actually do? I'm going to play the first video, which is a 3-minute video, which kind of puts it all together. So what we did clinically in the community to improve outcomes. It's a banging track. I'm going to sit down while this video plays. And I think that's the key thing. You know, the phrase, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a city to reduce amputations. You've got to bring everybody together across the entire patient pathway. And the best way to get people together and talking is cake. Lemon drizzle, if you want to know. That's my personal favourite. Okay. So, the next steps. Okay, so, where are we going? What is Mars Now? Well, Mars Now is 4 projects, and this is how we are affecting change across the community. And they are move more, diagnose more, reduce inequality more, and make every contact count more. This is how we're working across the community hospital, you know, public health, community hospital, and all of that. So let's zoom into each of these and just a very brief overview of what these 4 projects are. You're going to get ready for a ride. You can sometimes get a bit dizzy as it zooms in. All right, here we go. So move more. So move more is we know that if we refer people for exercise therapy, 70% won't attend. All right. And of the 30% that will attend, there's not enough capacity within the system for those people. So we've got 2 problems. We need to encourage people to take exercise and define what exercise is. It's not always going to the gym, it's just moving a bit more. And for the 30% that will go, we need to increase capacity. So we started working with the community gyms across Greater Manchester. There's 99 community gyms, 3,500 staff. Why don't they do the exercise therapy for us? So we're working with them to do that. Okay, and we opened up 60 new classes for people. Reduce inequality more. This is a really important piece of work, particularly for industry as well. One of the big problems with nurses, how do we reduce workload within the community team? All right, so as I said yesterday, you know, community nurses, they do wound care, they do injectables, and they do palliative care. 50 to 60% is wound care, about 20 to 30% is injectables. And one project, we do a multiple project in this area, but one project is, okay, if a nurse is going to give insulin to a patient 3 or 4 times a day, well, why don't we just change the insulin prescription so they just go once a day? Right? We've done that. We're doing that at the moment. Some work done down south has shown that by changing insulin delivery in 150 people, you'll save nearly £3 million and reduce visits by 30%. And that's how you increase capacity. You just got to work differently across the entire team. And secondly, we've got a huge inequality in dressings that are prescribed across the region. We've got £800,000 cost pressure alone, which is, if we do nothing, the cost of what we're using at the moment will go up by £800,000 this year. So how do we start using products more efficiently? How do we use the right products? And why do people not adhere to the wound care formulary that we've got at the moment? So the piece of work, optimizing the wound care formulary and making sure that people adhere to that formulary. Diagnose more. We're training over 600 nurses and podiatrists to do vascular assessments in the community, and we've bought a whole load of toe pressure machines and ABPI machines as well. And finally, make every contact count. We're using the aneurysm screening program to not only detect aneurysms, but also measure blood pressure, measure loneliness, and measure other risk factors of public health interest. And finally, you need a different mindset to change different results. You need people thinking differently to make change. And the final couple of points are this: the language of change is not clinical, all right? It's inequality. And secondly, don't see what you want to change as a clinical project. It's a change management project, because that's all you're doing. You're changing people from doing one thing to doing nothing. That just happens to be clinical. And that change in mindset is actually really important. And we use something called implementation science, which is basically how to win friends and influence people. Right? You can sort of influence the system in a particular way, and you've got to know the tricks to that. And how does it all fit together? Another very short video. What we've done is when we're speaking to strategists and commissioners and people on the ground, nobody quite understands how what you're doing fits together with the bigger picture. So we've created the vascular tube map, and based on that, we've managed to identify what does a good pathway look like. I've got a very short video that explains this. All right, here we go. Again, another banging track. The final point I want to make is don't take yourself too seriously. There's a huge amount of work going on across Greater Manchester, and it's always too slow. It's always contradictory, and it's always trying to undo itself. And so it's important to just try and, keep the faith and keep closer to people who are like-minded. And I just want to finish. Am I okay for time? I'm fine. Okay. I just want to finish on one final video. This is a video of me and Keith Harding of how we were having. Is Keith here? Yes. He is. There you are. Okay. So Keith is going to think, oh my God, he's going to play this video. Yes, I am going to play this video. Keith and I had a debate probably about 5 years ago in the College of Podiatry, and there were about 1,000 people in the audience. And the debate was amputations are preventable. And he was arguing that they are not preventable, and I was arguing that they are preventable. And shall we say, I finished with a flourish. And so I'm just going to end on this video, and it's just 5 minutes long.
Hello, Bournemouth. Welcome to the great debate. We've got 2 world-class speakers today on the stage, neither of them podiatrists, but they're going to debate one of the most important elements of perhaps what we do provide in podiatry and what we think we are achieving, which is the prevention of amputation. I've got Keith Harding, Professor Keith Harding from the Welsh Wound Care Institute, who is going to debate against the motion in the spirit of debate, a little bit like our Parliament does. There may be some insults flying around. Take it in jest. Nothing he says today can be held against him in the future. He's angling to argue against the motion. On this side, I've got Naseer Ahmad, our very own Manchester podiatry-friendly vascular surgeon, who's been on the scene with me in Manchester the past 3 years.
You will note, those of you who are experienced in parliamentary debates, that we are turning the tables on the normal way of doing things. That is because my sartorial challenge opponent wimped out. He didn't want to go first. Diabetic feet are prevented from amputation because we're all so clever. We are so naive, so immature. It is untrue. And my colleague, who is a junior colleague, I have to admit, is deluding himself and therefore potentially deluding you by trying to convince you that all these amputations are preventable. In terms of the big debate, the motion before this House, honourable colleagues, is that this House believes that we can prevent lower limb amputation. In my view, the only sensible and logical answer is no.
Who is Keith Harding? Well, look. He's the director of wound healing. He's the director of the Time Institute. He has brought in over £45 million worth of research, over 50 million. This man has got a CBE. He's been knighted. He's part of the establishment. He wears a grey suit, a black suit. I come with a flowery shirt. All right? So, how do I know all this? He's got a Wikipedia page. Does anybody here have a Wikipedia page? Can I just have a quick show of hands? All right. How many podiatrists in the audience have wished diabetes on a patient with a foot ulcer so that they can get into a diabetic foot clinic? Can I have a quick show of hands? There's a problem. That's a problem. And the plan is simple in Manchester. We already know what to do. As podiatrists, you know how to treat a foot ulcer. The tissue viability guys, they know how to treat leg ulcers. As a vascular surgeon, we know what to do. The problem is not that we don't know what to do. There's enough drugs out there. There's enough dressings out there. There's enough out there. All we need to do is put it all together, and it's all about the aggregation of marginal gains. Mars plan has been discussed in Parliament, and it's in the new Vascular Services document as well. Things are changing. But some people don't know. And some people are old, and some people won't change, and sometimes you just need something else to convince them. And sometimes, oh, there's some music. Can we have the music up a bit louder, please? Guys, change is possible. You've got to change. You just got to convince one man. Can we have the music louder, please?
For years and years, I chased their tears.
Look what he is.
The crazy speed of always needing more. But when I stop and see
We have one question.
I remember who
Music louder, please.
this was for.
What's the question?
And from now
Where's the dream gone? Guys,
these
what's
eyes will
happened?
not be blinded by
Where's the dream? Where's the dream?
from now
Where's the fire gone? Why have you changed?
till tomorrow
Why have you changed?
starts tonight.
Why?
Starts tonight. And let the promise
What can we do?
start like an anthem in my heart. From now on.
Oh, it gets better. Louder. Oh, it gets better. Manchester. We do things differently. Music louder, please. That's who we are. That's Manchester. We hate injustice. This is what we do.
These eyes will not be blinded by the lights. Let's wait until tomorrow starts tonight. It starts tonight. Let the promise in me start like an anthem in my heart. From now
Guys, let's go. Come on. Come on, believe. Come on, join the Dreamers. Come on. Come on. Believe. Thank you very much.